Hello everyone and welcome to continuation of our conversation about music. In today's mini lecture, we're going to be talking about Renaissance, which is pre-Baroque era, as well as start conversation about Baroque period of music and see what it is all about. Have you ever thought about what was the first musical instrument and why people had this need for creation of music? Perhaps it is quite obvious that the first musical instruments were drums and all kinds of percussive instruments. And the second in line is wind instruments, such as early types of flutes and whistles. And I just want to note that today we are not going to talk about early civilizations such as ancient China, for example, or ancient Egypt, because obviously all of the civilizations had their own musical instruments. You can go ahead and Google it, and it's very easy to find the information. But we will focus our attention on pre-Baroque era, which is Renaissance, and Baroque period of music, and we are going to talk about Western European music. Now let's start with some numbers. So Renaissance period of music started in 1400s and lasted for about 200 years until 1600s. And then Baroque period of music started in 1600s and it lasted until 1750, which is the death of maybe the most important Baroque composer, Johann Sebastian Bach. Renaissance means revival or rebirth, and we are talking about this awakening from the darkness of medieval era. During Renaissance times, there were all kinds of discoveries and all kinds of bloom happening in visual arts, in architecture, and most importantly in science. And music also was the area where innovation took place. What do we really need to know about Renaissance music? First, most important thing is that music was for the most part vocal, and it was concentrated in the church. It was all sacred music. And for the church, the best musical instrument of all times was the human voice. And with the development of some of the instruments, such as flute instruments and string instruments, church in the earlier stages of those developments saw these instruments as something evil and Satan, and they were really not welcomed to the churches, and they always wanted to just keep the purity of vocal music in churches. And it took music about 200 years, so from 1400 up to 1600s, in order to slowly get out of the church and get outside of the church. And let's look at certain factors that contributed this magnificent entrance out of the church. First factor is that music now could be printed. And printed music means that it could be widely distributed, right? And again, it makes its way outside of the church. So not printed on a paper yet, but early forms of printing were done on the wood blocks, and music was carved and then inked. So think about it took so much effort to actually being able to notate the music and just have it on a wood block, right? So imagine music of music of Chopin or Rachmaninoff's, complicated, where you have 10 to 20 notes in just one measure, or sometimes in one beat, right? Music could not possibly be so complicated and complex because every single note needed to be carved. But nevertheless, it was a huge innovation. Factor number 2 of how music, from being strictly sacred, right? So the goal of which just to serve the religious needs, slowly started to become more secular, meaning that music's purpose was pure interest, joy, and enjoyment. So this is just a small portion of some of the Renaissance instruments. You can see that we have early versions of violin and violas. There's a harpsichord, the instrument that we're going to talk a lot more about, and more variety of the wind instruments. And third factor is development of the pure interest in music, regardless of who you are, if you wanted to be a composer or performer. So all of these factors really pushed music basically on the streets and outside of religious constraints. And by the time we would hit 1600s, which is official beginning of a Baroque period in music and arts, music was truly a new sensation and the industry was in full bloom. Now let's talk briefly about Baroque period of music. Let me remind you the dates of the Baroque period. Again, it's from 1600s and until 1750, which is the death of Johann Sebastian Bach. And after Baroque period of music, we are starting a new, completely different classical Viennese period, which we'll talk about later. The word Baroque is a French word which means irregularly shaped, uneven, bizarre. And I think the best way to understand what Baroque is all about is by the look at the Baroque architecture. Look at those buildings, right? Look how massively decorated they are. There are a huge amount of all sorts of details, big and small. And it looks so complex and multi-layered. Now, when it comes to music, there is something similar that's going on, and it is contrapoint or polyphony in music, which means that you will have not one, but 2, 3, 4, 5, and up to 7 voices in the composition. And all of that is called polyphony. Poly comes from the Latin word many, and phono or phony comes from the Latin word voice, many voices. And as you remember, our most famous representative of Baroque era, such as Johann Sebastian Bach, George Handel, Domenico Scarlatti, and Antonio Vivaldi, their music is polyphonic. Let's listen to the fragment of Johann Sebastian Bach Brandenburg Concerto. He has 6 Brandenburg Concerti, and let's notice that his music is at this point already highly instrumental, and it is in fact a Baroque orchestra, which is a lot smaller than our modern orchestra, but still it's quite a number of instruments that are jointly played together. Now let's listen to a very popular Baroque piece written by George Handel, and I'm sure, even though you think you don't know it, you probably know it. And it's Handel's Passacaglia, that was originally written for a small Baroque orchestra. And one of the things that make this particular piece is so loved and very popular up until today is the Baroque sequence that is used in it. And it's so pleasant to the ear and actually sounds so contemporary. Just listen to this. So this is Baroque sequence that was such a popular chord progression, and it was used basically by every single Baroque composer because it was just such a popular progression. Listen. It sounds so contemporary, right? And I'm sure you've heard it in many pop songs today. And in conclusion, I just want to tell you that if you think about Baroque music as something old-fashioned, and not interesting, I think this is quite wrong. My personal favorite is music of Johann Sebastian Bach, which is so timely and so incredibly fresh. Just listen to this. This was written more than 300 years ago, and it sounds so fresh even today. Enjoy your Baroque pieces and listen to some Bach today.